Welcome back to Just Liberty, where justice and liberty meet. I'm Alan Reinach, president of the Church State Council, here with my co host Bettina Krause, editor of Liberty Magazine. And together we're trying to take back liberty from the I can speak, the political extremes. And today it's an old topic that's back again, the Ten Commandments. It seems that the government can't keep their grubby paws off the Ten Commandments. And there's just a spate of legislation. And as Christians, as Seventh day Adventists who believe in keeping the Ten Commandments, we think that there might be something amiss with having the government promoting it. So, Bettina, why don't you introduce our guest?
We are absolutely delighted to have with us today Amireh Al-Haddad, and she is Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the Southern Union Conference of Seventh day Adventists. And she has been around the tracks for something like 30 years, right, Amireh?
Yes. I don't wanna go higher than 30. I give it away.
No, we'll cap it at 30, but Amira has been working on religious liberty issues for many, many years, not only in areas such as Sabbath accommodation challenges, which are very specific or very common within the Seventh day Adventist church, but also dealing with legislative issues, church state separation issues throughout the territory that she cares for. And in fact, maybe we should mention that because, Amira, you are specifically focused on a number of states. And what are they? Since I don't have them at the tip of my tongue.
So it's the 8 southeastern states in the United States. Um, Boy, I hope I can name them all. This is this this is where I may get a dock in my paycheck. It's Alabama, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Florida.
Great. And so, for that reason, you are really well qualified to speak to an issue that really has been in the news since last summer, which is the passage of House Bill 71 in the Louisiana state legislature. Which, why don't you just give us some background on this piece of legislation, Amira, and why it's causing a little bit of angst at present?
Well, the legislation, of course, it's in Louisiana, so that was not one of the states I mentioned. It's not my territory. I don't know if I can say fortunately or unfortunately, but it came up and we weren't expecting it. We didn't know it was coming up until about a week before it passed, and then it just very abruptly came up and passed. The legislation was passed by the General Assembly there, and it prescribes that all government buildings, including schools, should have posted a a, a government approved edition of the Ten Commandments. So it's kind of specific in how that gets posted. The Ten Commandments are dictated by size. It has to at least be, I think, 11 by 14 or something like that. The Ten Commandments can't be some little bitty subset in the poster. It has to be the focal point of the poster. Um, they prescribed that it had to be the approved uh, wording for um, the version of the Ten Commandments that the state assembly wanted. Um, let's see what else. I think I've covered the main points, and of course, it has to be posted. And I think this is our big push here. It has to be posted in all public schools from elementary through to the university levels. I mean, every classroom of public schools.
So, Amira, in the past, we have seen some Ten Commandments efforts that included other, quote, historical documents. And so, because of constitutional concerns, the Establishment Clause, the kind of legislative strategy was to package the commandments, say, with the Declaration of Independence or other significant historical documents, and to say, well, we're not posting this for religious reasons. We're posting it because it's a significant, piece of history in Western civilization, which of course it is. But it's obviously primarily a sacred text. Um, in the Louisiana bill that was passed last year, is it a standalone? It's a bill just to require the Ten Commandments. It's not packaged with other historical documents.
I have not specifically checked on that, but I believe it is. I believe it is. We had a similar case in 2018 in Alabama, which is my territory, and we did oppose that particular. It wasn't even a bill in Alabama. In Alabama in 2018, they passed a constitutional amendment that allowed for the Ten Commandment posting in all government buildings. And that's been a big fight going on since Judge Roy Moore and his Ten Commandments issues in the early 2000s had been going on. And it's interesting because at least in Alabama, it wasn't packaged with any other bill. It was just, you can post the Ten Commandments. It wasn't quite as prescribed as the Louisiana bill has been prescribed. But what was interesting in Alabama is that the grassroots organization that started the amendment would talk about people who opposed the amendment as being the ungodly foe or, being evil to oppose such a thing. Even if you were opposing as a Christian to say, as I would say, this is not the job of the government. This is the job of the church to hold this sacred text up. So it's interesting, and I mention this because I want to kind of anticipate what the kickback to Christians who would oppose the Ten Commandments posting might be. And what we have seen, at least in my territory in the South, of that having been. Now that was a state amendment, so it didn't get tossed out. It's still there. We just kind of live with it. But my concern is that you kind of lessen or devalue something that is so sacred that it was written by the hand of God, by the finger of God. And now you just made it this thing that you're going to legislate and put into a poster and force everybody to put up on their wall. When in reality, I think that Christians know there it doesn't matter how far you go to post any Ten Commandment. If you don't live a life that includes the Ten Commandments, if you haven't engraved the Ten Commandments on your brain, in your mind, in your life, then it really is just a decorative device that people will just walk by and it won't even make a difference. So, you know, would we be better off posting the new commandment that Jesus gave, which is love one another? I think that that would be a better commandment to post. But yeah, so as far as I know, to go back to the question, as far as I know, it's not kind of caught up in any other um, historical posting.
So it's interesting to me, Amira, that looking at the legislation, it actually begins by citing a quote from Madison, James Madison, one of our founding um, generation, and the quote goes something along the lines of, "We have staked everything on the idea that to govern ourselves, we have to um, we have to hold on to the moral principles of the Ten Commandments." That's the basic quote. Here's what's interesting. James Madison never said that. That's a debunked quote. That is literally not in his writings, and the scholars who his writings have time and time again worked to that particular claim, yet it is being quoted by a state legislature in 2024. I mean, I guess what I'm asking is how far are all these efforts connected with a misunderstanding of American history and a misunderstanding of American constitutional protection for religious freedom?
I think it's all a huge, and I'm not going to say the word misunderstanding. What I'm going to say is the word miseducation, because what we've seen over the last 30 years in the religious liberty field that all of us work in is a very intentional set of misrepresented historical facts that we've now had a generation and a half of American Christians growing up on, and that it has so infiltrated their understanding and their what they term as their moral fiber, that it's just off track. So we think that our nation's constitutional history was the same as when the founding fathers got together and declared our independence from Great Britain, right? So we think, oh, 1776 is this big day, which we're going to be celebrating next year. And everything happened in 1776. And so people will look back and say, yeah, but in 1780, we still had state churches. So clearly, the Constitution didn't disallow that. And what you don't realize, because you're not a student of the real history that's not biased in trying to, get a Christian nation understanding in our minds, what you don't realize is that the Declaration of Independence and our Bill of Rights were years apart in creation and passage, years apart. And so, as we build a nation, we start to rethink how we are going to interface with religion and how religion will interface with government. And so, if you're just meshing all that time together and say, oh, it's all this good stuff, because look at how it was, when our founding fathers started this nation. Well, no, you have to look and see how they were arcing towards a more representative government as they got closer to our constitutional period. So, I think just having people think that James Madison would say that, that's a big deal. 30 years ago, Christians used to love Thomas Jefferson, but then it was kind of debunked that Jefferson wasn't, the great Christian that everybody thought he was. He was a deist, right? He wrote a version of the Bible that ended with Christ's death and not his resurrection. And so now you kind of, if you look at the undercurrents of America, you'll see not a whole lot of Christians like to quote Thomas Jefferson anymore. He's kind of seen as ungodly and unchristlike. And so what have they done? They've switched over to James Madison, and they've created things he didn't even say to kind of support this. So
Well, Bettina, when you started reading that quote, I instantly reacted because I knew it didn't sound like Madison. I know Madison well enough, and I'll tell you what Madison did say that I think is relevant to this conversation, and it's not a perfect quote, but he said, who does not see that the same authority that can promote or fund all churches can promote or fund a particular church. And I think about what happened after 9/11 in California. There was a dawning awareness that it was important for American school children to know something about Islam. So they created a curriculum about Islam that was taught, fourth grade, I think it was. But it also, I mean, didactically, it was, like hands-on. So they would do, like, dress up and do prayers and do religious things like Muslims. But guess what? The good Christian folk in California were up in arms about violation of the separation of church and state, because you're not just teaching about religion, but now you're having children practice religion. So, if you want to think about the constitutional issue with putting up the Ten Commandments, I think the way to think about it is, how would you feel if the law said you had to post um, something from the Quran
Mm.
or something from the Bhagavad Gita, from somebody else's sacred text? Would you be okay with that if all school children were exposed to that? I mean, that's, why does the government get to pick and choose?
And I guess that is one of the big questions surrounding this piece of legislation. What is its purpose? Because is its purpose to educate on or to proselytize? I mean, Alan says, yes, in some instances, there's been attempts to, bring world religions into the classroom, some successful, some not. And that's a legitimate educational purpose, I would imagine. But Amireh, um, what is your sense on this legislation regarding its ultimate purpose?
I think that its ultimate purpose is to counteract secularism or perceived secularism, which is part of what we used to call the culture war today. I think it's
We still do.
perceived. We still do, exactly. Only now we say things like, worldview or, some other things that we've renamed them as. But I think that the battle here is between religious rights versus civil rights. And there seems to be this feeling that the two are clashing, and really and truly they're not clashing. Um, in any society where you have civil rights and religious rights, you have to work these out. You have to find that precarious balance. We always have said that the balance of church and state is very, very delicate, very fine. Um, and it only takes half an ounce to tip the scales sometimes. So I think that what we're seeing is this reaction to secularism and this idea that if you want the world, not to go to hell in a handbasket, as the saying goes, you've got to instill religion in the people. And instilling religion in the people is the only thing that will work. Well, the question here is it possible to be an atheist and a morally upright person? Can you be an atheist and follow the laws of the land? Or do you have to be a Christian in order to obey the speed limits or not to kill someone? These are questions I think that people who are not religious or non-religious at all or of differing religions will say that you can do these things without having a religious law at your heart. Um, but again, I think that this is, when the world is going down the hill, thing you need to do is, you know, instill Christianity in everything. So that's the reason.
One of the problems that I have with these Ten Commandment bills, and I gather that there were a number of them introduced in other state legislatures this year, right? Do you know how many? Um,
We have one in Tennessee that has not been introduced yet. I think it's been pre-filed. Um, I haven't seen a new one except for that one this
okay,
discussion
but
yet.
typically what's posted begins with "Thou shalt not." What's posted are the rules, but the chapter doesn't begin with "Thou shalt not." And the Jewish version begins with, I am the Lord thy God, who has brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Therefore, the commandments theologically and textually follow from a relationship with God, where God has delivered us, right? And when I talk to churches about this, they understand the problem with just putting up the rules, right? Our rebellious nature, if God is the God of the rules, then what we're teaching the kids is step out of line and you're toast, buddy. You know, and it's a picture of God that drives people away from church. Everybody that I have known who had that idea of God, that God was sitting up there waiting for you to mess up and ding you, you know, uh, they're not in church anymore, because it's what Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men. It's understanding the lengths that Jesus went to for us that draws people. The rules by themselves, I mean, they're fantastic principles to live by, no question. And we as Seventh-day Adventists of all people, we cherish the commandments, and yet we want government to keep their grubby paws off of them, right?
Right. Absolutely. We, you know, for us as Christians, I think that what we need to ask ourselves is, what have we not done right that we now have to have the government do it for us?
Good question.
It's a great question, Amireh.
You know, and if you have to have the government do it for you, then shame on you as a Christian because you've not done your job. And the reverse of that, not necessarily the reverse, but to go further into that, um, when the church loses the grace of God, when the church loses the love of Jesus, then what happens is the church turns to the state to execute her dogmas. And I think that we're to the point where we're going to say, have you as a Christian lost the grace that God has given you? Have you lost the love that Jesus, bestows upon us? So that now you have to turn to the state to execute your religious decrees for you. There's something wrong with that.
And to
There's
force
something
it on
wrong with
others.
yeah, and to force it on others. Exactly. God doesn't force anything on us. I mean, we can't talk about religious freedom and not talk about God and his interaction with religious freedom in us. So, where do we think that we know more than God and we're going to do that much more than God does? Um, it's wrong thinking. It's the wrong way to go, and it's the wrong road to even, start down. So I just as much as I love the 10 Commandments are for Christians to teach and share with other people. It is not for the government to be the institutor of the religious belief here for the churches.
I want to take a look at what's going to happen down the track, or at least try to sort of exercise some prophetic gifts. Um, I just as we've been talking, I had a quick look. It looks like South Dakota has passed or has got a bill like this in motion, and it also looks like Kentucky has, and Montana as well. So it looks like there's sort of this type of legislation is gaining traction in politically conservative states. I wonder, Amira, you've got many years of experience of dealing with these kinds of things. Do you think that perhaps given the recent Supreme Court decision a couple of years back in Kennedy versus Bremerton, where the Lemon test, which, traditionally was used in establishment clause cases and would have been used perhaps in a case about the Ten Commandments, that test was dismissed we're sort of having a less robust establishment clause jurisprudence, I guess, from the Supreme Court. Do you think that what's happening in the states is kind of a strategy to to sort of test the waters of how far states will push, something that would be traditionally perceived as impermissible under the Constitution, but they're kind of just pushing the boundaries, see how far they can go. Is that a possibility?
Oh, it could be, but here's the way I think about it. We have not talked about this in 5 years, and that's a group called the National Prayer Caucus Group. And they created, before the 2020 elections, they had created kind of a manual for how to pass at grassroots levels Judeo-Christian style laws. Sorry, I have energy saving lights that like to go on at the wrong time. um, they are they have been very successful, I think, in pushing at a grassroots level. And when we're talking about the state's legislative halls, I think that's where we're looking. And they started with little things like in Tennessee, they added "In God We Trust" to the state motto. It's very clear that they want to add more Ten Commandment bills to it. At one point, you could download their recruitment and teaching material, but then in 2020, right before the election, they took all of their training material offline. So they kind of went into shadow mode, and and you could request it, and if they liked who you were, they would give it to you, and if they didn't, they wouldn't. I requested it, and I never received it. So, um, that's how I know you can't just request it and they'll send it to you. Um, so I think that part of this is at a grassroots level of people who are definitely working to push a more dominionistic um, understanding that everything needs to be scripturally based. All our laws need to have scriptural, from biblical underlying understandings. And I think that this is a chain reaction as those bills started out in 2020, that they're going forward and they're growing and they're moving along from that. But we hardly ever talk about the National Prayer Caucus anymore. I mean, I don't even know. I haven't looked at them in 3 years, so I don't even know if they exist. But certainly they got a ball rolling at the grassroots level in the states to get this stuff passed.
Well, with the tenor of the current majority on the Supreme Court, it remains to be seen where this is going to go because, of course, there have been cases before the court before, and there may yet be, future cases. But so we're probably going to have opportunities to come back to this topic and to have you back with us again on this or another topic, Amira. But thank you so much for joining us for this just delightful interview.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Alan, that was a great discussion. I was talking with someone the other day who said to me, "How can you, as a Bible believing Christian, not support the post commandments on classroom walls? What is wrong with you?" And I think our conversation really made a good case for why, as a Christian, I actually don't want that.
Yeah, well, there's so much more that could have been said, right? I mean, it's so old covenant to have it on the wall instead of in the heart, right? And that was, my response way back when Judge Roy Moore was doing his thing and the commandments were all in the news was instead of trying to oppose the posting of them or get involved in some of the uh, litigation, to promote the idea that God wants to write the commandments in our hearts. You know, I need to dig up. We did some public service spots back then. I need to dig those up and take a listen. They may still be worth doing something with.
Yeah, definitely. This is a boomerang issue. It keeps coming back, which is a nice Australian way to end the podcast, Alan, because I think we'll be discussing this many, many times in the coming months and years. So this has been Just Liberty, and I hope you'll join us next time. I'm Bettina Krause, and I'm here with Alan Reineck. And remember, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty.